No PowerPoint, no visuals at all. So it's
That's absolutely fine. We'll just listen then. Thank you.
listening to the radio. Imagine you're listening to the radio, I guess, as you prepare your lunch. Thank you to everybody who's presented and the technician person. Thank you so much. It's been a fascinating morning. So this is a personal piece. I would be aggrandizing it a little bit if I called it autoethnography, but that's what I'm striving for. That's what I'm striving for, but I'm not there yet, I feel. So anyway, it's a granular look at the way I became Dr. Josie. I had adoptive parents who probably should never have been married. They were more or less at war their whole lives in a kind of narcissistic bubble. As kids, we were clothed and fed. We were privileged in many ways, but something was wrong. In adulthood, as soon as I spoke about and then discovered my genetic family, my adoptive mother began to frame family events or conflicts in a way that minimized my place in the family. Relationships built over a lifetime were somehow now inferior to blood relationships. She'd always done this in times of turmoil. My teens, for example, in mid-rebellion, she'd say, well, you wouldn't understand family loyalty because you're not blood. Apparently, my sister, her natural child, could understand. And when she started a family, my mother ramped up the non-blood theme to exclude me from the family home for any misstep, such as being late with a birthday card. None of this disregard for my humanity had really succeeded in getting rid of me while my dad was alive, though, because he argued for me. So when he died, I knew the end was in sight. In deep grief, I no longer felt able to handle the mundane brutality of every interaction with my mother and sister. After arguments over big issues like inheritance and tiny things like my dad's new guitar strings, I floated bloodlessly away from the family. Not forever, I hoped. Not everyone in this kind of circumstances decides to write a novel. Why did I, and what did I make of it? I'd written every day since I was 20 and understood the transformative power of fiction, both as a reader and writer. But I am primarily a writer. I write. I also sought psychological help as a support framework. At the doctor's, one of those 6-session people told me I shouldn't write because I would re-traumatize myself. Besides, she said, the only person who wrote a book in that state was Carl Jung, and you're not Carl Jung. She'd never seen any of my work, so how did she know who I was? I'm not Carl Jung, but I knew enough not to see her again. I looked at other kinds of therapeutic help, but was sincerely put off by the pathologizing of adoptees from all sides. I firmly resist the idea that as an individual, I have a pathology all my own. If I have a defective ability, it came from somewhere. It was made by circumstance. It's not a fault in me, at least not until I say it is. It didn't matter what kind of therapy I tried, I always felt a little bit like a lab rat. Therapists used me for their research and their statistics, and while I appreciated the kindness and help, what I knew instinctively but couldn't articulate at the time was that I am a member of a traumatized group, a veteran of human rights abuse and all the individualist theory or saviorist practice in the world was only ever going to bring out the affect of shame in me. Even something as simple as the truism that a child's personality and development is formed by the time they are at, is it 2, 5, 7? This would lead me to believe that I was basically fucked. Pardon the language. My understanding of shame is that it is an affect of being rather than doing. Shame is about who I am, not about what I do. Guilt for what I've done may be appropriate at times, but shame for who I am? Adoption was always thought of the solution, not the problem, and psychological theory seemed to shame me into believing that if my adoption had broken, I must be the problem. My mother and sister certainly thought I was. Where do you go when therapy doesn't help? Meanwhile, 2 of my novels were commercial and had been published. I'd been interviewed on the BBC, appeared in newspapers, sold a good number of books, all under a pseudonym. It was natural for me to write a novel, and writing fiction was a place where I could give characters my thoughts and feelings. I thought the only way to write the truth is in fiction, in disguise, in other words. The idea of a memoir seemed way too dangerous. Jeanette Winterson in Why Be Happy When You Can Be Normal explained that when she wrote Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, an adoptee memoir was unpublishable. She was at Oxford and thereby connected to the world of publishing in a way that many of us aren't. In the early 2000s, though, memoir did feel more possible, but when an agent offered to sell my work under the misery memoir genre, I decided not to take her up on her offer. On the one hand, I was fearful of the way the truth of my experience might be received by my family. I still felt that we could reconcile someday and didn't want to jeopardize that. But I also felt that I wasn't writing a misery memoir. I was writing a beautiful novel. I was suspicious of the commercial machine. I knew it at first hand, and it wasn't what I wanted for my truth. Society categorizes all our output to serve capitalism. I didn't need to do that again. Something needed to be said in the work I'd embarked upon, though. Something needed recognition. Jhumpa Lahiri, in a 2012 essay, Trading Stories, it's called, calls this stepping into writing the transition from listening to listen to me. I met a young American female academic at Luton and signed up for an MPhil. She'd been taught by Saul Bellow, which made me breathless. She also had a specialism in the Black Archive, which perhaps appealed to my sense of marginalisation, although that didn't consciously inform my choice at the time. She coached me through my application, saw the importance of my work. That's why I signed up. Within weeks, though, she took another job, and I followed her because Luton was about to put creative writing into its media studies department. She had more of a literary purpose, and her early seminars at the new Russell Group University were fabulous, creating a real sense of a group working together to help each other produce the best literature we could. Managerially, though, she'd been hired to make changes, and she quickly began to get the backs up of every, I'm afraid, usually white male poet on the staff. I tried not to take sides. I was an expert at diplomatic neutrality, having grown up in the middle of my parents. It was intense, though, and left a lot of people angry. 18 months into my now PhD, the home I'd chosen for my new creative identity as a serious novelist was crumbling. More functional colleagues that were caught in it started looking at supervisors in other parts of the country. They took themselves seriously. They'd invested in themselves. For me, it was taking every ounce of my energy to keep going, pay the rent, take care of body and soul. Ambition took a back seat. Besides, I had arrived at this Russell Group University by the back door. No one else. This makes me feel tearful. No one else would take me, I thought, and I should just lay low and finish my novel. The no one else would take me seems so strange to say now, and it never came to consciousness properly then. I was 20 months old when I was adopted, and I was told immediately, But part of the story that I was not a baby in the family, I was a toddler, because I'd been sent back to the children's home so many times, and this was my last chance, so I'd better behave. It's powerful stuff to tell a 4-year-old. So powerful that you're still carrying it in your 50s when you're doing a PhD. Plus, in my 50s, I still had no idea what I needed from a supervisor, but I did have purpose, which was to reclaim what I called the truth. Betty Jean Lifton, writing in the 1990s, saw the adopted self as a divided whole. The adoptee born psychologically into the closed adoption system and shaped by its myths, secrets, and taboos from first conscious memory, has a unique self, an adopted self, but this fragile self has a basic inner division brought about for the need for denial that is built into the closed system. As a novelist, I could create characters from the divided self and allow at least one to speak what she'd always known. My drive was for her to be heard. I had a strange sensation that I could change the world if I spoke my truth from this Peter Pan type lost child in my psyche. This child believed that if only she could speak, people would, take your pick, not treat her as if she didn't matter, tell her where her mother was. And of course, in real life, in the past, openness would have changed my world phenomenally as a child. No one could understand me when, as a toddler in a new home, I asked where my mother was. My parents were compliant with the policy of anonymous separation. My adopted mother was frightened that my first mother would steal me back, and civil society protected her from that imagined intrusion. The weight of the state, with its codes on birth certificates and its legal system, had stolen my right as a baby girl, human right as a baby girl wanting to know where her mum was. Writing fiction had always had some childlike aspect for me. The delighted excitement of working on something that begins to sparkle. It's like the fairies have come to visit. I sincerely believed in fairies, in spirits, Peter Pan in particular. They were the friends to the lonely child that I was. I rarely share about this element of magical thinking that fuels my work at times. It's almost too much intrinsic Josie. Some adopter has to save this wild orphan imagination from itself. Anyway, meanwhile, the university righted itself. I got an apology for all the disruption and a new supervisor, a Shakespeare scholar, who I somehow trusted to get me through. He had, after all, dedicated his professional life to a writer who believed enough in spirits and fairies to bring them to life. And as I closed the work on the novel and embarked on the exegesis, my supervisor really put me through my paces. I had to get serious and put my work into some kind of tradition or context. I was able now to bring some of the energy of my reclaimed child to look at orphans in literature. I discovered people that we've heard about, like Lem Sissay with his foundling exhibits, and Rosie Canning with her care experience and culture website. I've discovered these people were working in the same area. No one can study the history of literature without seeing that without the orphan archetype, there would be no literature. I got fascinated by the earliest novels where morally we are ambiguous, outside the established order because we're not parented. Orphans become mirrors in their innocence, held mostly with humour to the absurdities of convention and morality. There was no actual history of adoption when I was researching, so I was lucky enough to find original sources. My bridge book, the one that really opened up my path forward, was one I came across by accident in a charity shop. The Kindness of Strangers by John Boswell. Boswell's huge contribution to my work was in his study of the crossover between fiction and history in the stories of orphans in antiquity. An adoptee himself, an American academic, he looked right back into the formation of Western culture at records, usually legal cases, to see if real-life orphans were as frequent in society as they are in plays and tales and biblical parables. They seem to be. Boswell died young, but he helped me claim an ancestry in those orphan records, these orphan stories. I craved ancestors so much. I also discovered adoption history in 1920s England that I'm still finding rewarding, and an activist who's become really important to me and Rosie Canning as an inspiration. We recently collaborated on an exhibit of Hannah Brown's life and work with the Founding Museum in London. Hannah blew the lid off the saviourist narrative of the hospital, and by extension, the saviourist version of all the adoption hegemony. Not to throw the good ones out with the bathwater, I have a lot of time for people like Coram and the painter Hogarth, who really were well-intentioned. But as we know, institutions quickly become corrupted with use and abuse, as Annie and others have documented. Orphans scooped off the streets to train as household servants, cannon fodder or mill workers are well documented in Orphans of Empire by Helen Berry. These references will be available later on today. So what would I want for a current lonely adoptee embarking on a PhD? A sense of group. In other words, you here, you make the difference. Some of what I found, the language, the assumptions, even the stuff we've heard today, just made me feel furious. Too angry for calm discourse. I admire those of you who can do that. But the group of us that I found in Boswell and in Brown was a refuge. History as a refuge is not always a good thing, but when it's our history, not a history of adoption as in laws made or broken or whatnot, but our history as inventions and real people, testaments to how much we have contributed, like anyone else, to the storying and collected culture of this moment, that is different. And when I say like anyone else, that's revolutionary for me. Our history shows me, shows us, we are as good as anyone else. Thank you.